Okay, well, let me introduce myself. I'm Radhika. I'm here to talk a little bit about where I come from, and the reason why my name is Radhika is because I was born in India. And you're thinking, what? You don't look Indian, you don't sound Indian, you can't possibly be Indian. I'm not Indian, but I was born there and I was raised there for 12 years of my life. My parents are and were both Hare Krishnas, and they decided to move there to India because of their chosen religion. For those of you who don't know what a Hare Krishna is, or you kind of know but you're not quite sure, the proper term for somebody who called a Hare Krishna, the proper term is a Vaishnava, and that is the worshipper of Vishnu, or more specifically, a worshipper of Krishna. The Hare Krishnas were pretty much invented by this guy called Prabhupada. His full name is Abhaycharan Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, but that's way too long for anybody to remember, so I'm just going to keep it short and call him Prabhupada because that's what I've called him my whole life. So Prabhupada was born in India back in the 19th century, and he was born in Calcutta, West Bengal, and that's the same city that I was born in. He was given a mission by his guru, his spiritual master, to take his philosophy and his beliefs, to take it to the West, to spread Krishna consciousness. So he did that. He went to New York, and he didn't have any money. He literally just sat under a tree and chanted Hare Krishna and singing, and then back in 1962, it was full-on hippie mode. So people were like, "Ooh, what's this dude?" And, he's chanting this thing, and that's kind of interesting. So then they started to ask him questions, and he would answer them, and he would preach to them about Krishna consciousness and about God and about this religion, this not a religion, it was a way of life. Join the Hare Krishnas and it completely changes your life. At least this is what I have seen. I wouldn't know because I didn't join the Hare Krishnas. I was born into the Hare Krishnas. That was just my life from the beginning. So people back in the 60s and then onward to the 70s, 80s, 90s until now have been joining the Hare Krishna movement. And the Hare Krishna movement that was originally Prabhupada's is called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. More commonly known, or the short version is ISKCON. If you want to know more about ISKCON, I'll post links below. And that way you don't have to listen to me rambling about the foundation of it. I'm going to talk about my experiences and the experiences of people that I know. So I was born in 1987, as I said, in Calcutta, India. I had a pretty good upbringing, considering other people that I know who didn't. I'll get back to that sooner or later. So my parents, unlike many ISKCON parents, they didn't send me to boarding school. My parents lived together. We had an apartment that the temple gave us in Calcutta, and my sister and I, we grew up with our parents. We had that part of our childhood which was normal. The reason why I say that's normal is because a lot of the people that I know didn't grow up with their parents. Many Hare Krishna children, second generation, were sent to boarding schools, and these are called gurukuls. So gurukul is a word, I think, in Sanskrit or Bengali, I'm not sure, and that means like a school. So they used to be, from the age of 5, it was tradition from, I think, the early 70s and 80s, to send the kids to school, to gurukuls, while the parents did service in the temples or did book distribution and things like that. My parents were not like that. I grew up in the 90s, and by then things were starting to change in ISKCON. We went to day school in a place called Mayapur, India. Something that you should know about the Hare Krishnas, like many religious communities, they don't really want their kids to mix with outside people. By outside I mean non-Hare Krishnas. And so we grew up very much isolated from everything. We didn't have TV. We did not have books that were not related to Hare Krishnas. Not until later on in my life. When I was about from the ages of baby to 6 years old to 7 years old, I rarely was exposed to anything that was not Hare Krishna. I went to Hare Krishna school. All my friends were Hare Krishnas. All the people I knew were Hare Krishnas. Everything was just Hare Krishna. When I was in the Hare Krishna schools, we were taught how to read. We learned how to write, of course. We learned mathematics. I was a kid. I was a really young kid, so I'm talking about really basic stuff. I remember specifically having to learn 100 shlokas, or verses, from the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is the song of God. It's supposedly when Krishna spoke to his friend and devotee Arjuna during this battle, and Arjuna there was like a feud between these guys called the Pandavas and these guys called the Kauravas, and they were cousins and they were royalty, and the Pandavas were the rightful heir to the throne, and the Kauravas were like, no, we want the throne. So then this huge war ended up happening, and so Arjuna is there about on the first day of battle. The fight's about to start, and he's like, I can't do this. I cannot kill the people that I grew up with. These are my cousins, these are my uncles, these are my friends, these are my teachers. And Krishna says basically enough stuff to fill a book to convince Arjuna that it's okay for him to kill his brother and his cousins and friends, because we are not this body, we're the spirit souls, and that the soul is eternal, and you can never kill the soul. The soul cannot be damaged. The soul cannot die. The only thing that is damaged and dies is our bodies. But once we die, we reincarnate. Or, if you're a pure devotee of Krishna, you go back to Godhead, meaning that you are free from the cycle of birth and death, which is reincarnation. It's super complicated and quite interesting. If you think that's cool, then I recommend that you read it. It'll give you knowledge, you know? That's cool, knowledge is good. You should know about stuff. So, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, there was this test, this exam that we were given, and we spent, I don't know, months or something studying for it, and we had to learn by memory 100 verses from the Bhagavad Gita. And to this day, I don't remember 100, but I can remember like 3. Matra sparshas tu kaunteya, sitasna sukha dukkada, agama paino nitya, sampratikshasva bharata. That one is... oh god, I can't remember the translation, hang on. The non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course, are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O sign of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. That's basically, I think, what it was. Another one. Dehinosmin yata dehe komadam yovanam jara tata dekhantara praptir dirastatra namuyati. I think that one, the translation for that one might be, as the embodied soul continually passes from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes from one body to another. I don't remember it very well. In the end it goes, a sober person is not bewildered, or a self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. So okay, this is a quick example of the philosophy. What else did we learn? We learned how to play the harmonium. We learned how to play mridanga. We learned how to... I remember being specifically taught how to dance. Dancing is very important for a girl. We must all know how to dance. How could we not? We're girls. This is one thing that's very typical of kids that were raised in ISKCON, is that we were brought up like these prodigies, basically. We were taught regular things that kids are taught, but we were also taught how to be actors and artists and dancers and musicians, because that's how you spread Krishna consciousness. That's how you make the religion more attractive. That's how you bring people in, and that's how you celebrate God. I mean, at least that's how you celebrate Krishna. That's how you're supposed to. All of the religious services have music and singing, and definitely dancing is encouraged. Just don't be too provocative. And I'll get back to that later in a video that I'm going to make later. So we did plays, we did dances, we were, you know, constantly being really artistic, and that was really fun. I think that's something that I really liked. Because I'm by nature an artist. I like art. I don't know if this was necessarily like, I don't know how other people felt about it, but I think most of us enjoyed it, and it was really fun. However, when I was 7 years old, my parents separated, and I lived in San Diego, California for a year. And that was really weird, because for the first time ever, I had to interact with people who weren't Hare Krishnas, with kids who weren't Hare Krishnas. And back then I was 7, so I wasn't really aware of things. But I remember being really shocked and disturbed that people ate meat. What? People eat meat? People eat eggs? You eat chicken? How could you? Because Hare Krishna philosophy is, you have to be a vegetarian. You can drink milk because cows are sacred, and so everything that comes from the cow is sacred. There are literally people who drink cow pee because it's sacred and it's supposed to heal you, even though that's quite disgusting. And probably a way to pass on disease. I don't know. I just don't. Luckily, I never had to drink cow pee. It is one of the greatest sins to eat meat, or, you know, meat includes fish, chicken, eggs, you know, this is all, you know, animal has to die for you to eat it, even though eggs are like a what, but also we weren't allowed to eat onion and garlic for some weird reason. It was like, onion and garlic they grow underground, so it's the mode of ignorance, and I'm like, but carrots grow underground too, and we eat that, and so do potatoes, but yeah, I guess logic doesn't really apply when it comes to religion. Anywho, so when I was 7, it was like, blah, culture shock. I have friends in school who don't believe in Krishna. That was weird, but I guess my little mind sort of was like, oh, okay, that's cool, you know, people are different, I don't know, I accepted it. But then when I was 8, we moved back to India, and by then, we got a TV, and it was like, okay, it's too late. I guess I was ruined, you know, I don't know, because living in San Diego and going to public school, we had television. I remember watching Winnie the Pooh and Real Monsters, I think, and the Rugrats, and it was like, well, too late, you know, your kids now love cartoons and you know it, so you gotta give it to them, otherwise they're gonna be miserable. So I think that was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me in my childhood, was when I was able to have a TV and to read books that weren't about Krishna. And I remember, I think this was a pivotal moment in my life when I watched A Little Princess, and I was exposed to this insane idea that little girls can challenge authority. It was like, what? She's like me, but she's standing up for herself. She can do that? Holy crap. It was just, it was amazing. And from there on, it was, I mean, I read The Secret Garden, and I loved books, and thankfully my mother saw that, and she got me loads of books, and she encouraged it because she saw that my mind was hungry for knowledge and for stories. And I even read The Hobbit when I was 9 years old, and that's not something that's easy to read, but I was just really keen on knowing things. And I was lucky that my parents didn't try to shut me down, because I know people whose parents did. They're like, nope, you're not allowed to watch that TV show. Nope, you're not allowed to, to read that book. Or no, if it's not bona fide, then, you can't do it. And bona fide is like, if it's not Krishna conscious. And of course you get like some really stupid crap. Like people are like, oh yeah, the Matrix is bona fide because it makes you question the material world and the reality that we live in. And the material world is like the Matrix, and the spiritual world is when you read, when you're in Krishna consciousness and you realize that you're living in the Matrix forever. I'm like, yeah, fuck that. That's bullshit. You know it is. You just want to watch the Matrix and you're just making up any old excuse to make it sound bona fide, Anyway, this is just a brief introduction to how I grew up. My parents were pretty liberal compared to some other ones, and that's awesome. I'm very grateful for that, because that allowed me to understand that there is a world outside of the Hare Krishna world. And when I was a kid and when I was a teenager, I mostly chose not to participate in that world, because I was really indoctrinated, and from the moment I was born, I had grown up in this community, and I felt that was my safe place. And also we were taught that by associating with people who weren't devotees, and the word that they use and that we used back then is karmis. Karmis because people who are not devotees of Krishna generate karma, and they continue to just being trapped in this world. So I was really not encouraged to hang out with people or to talk to people or be with people that weren't Hare Krishnas. I mean, my parents specifically tried to foster a certain sort of respect for other people, regardless of their beliefs. But there were many of my friends who were militantly taught to avoid anybody who wasn't a Hare Krishna, and we were taught that, we could be contaminated with their association, that, somehow our vulnerable minds would be twisted into whatever it was that other people were believing, and then we would fall down from our high position in life, or, from our pure position, or we would somehow be led astray, and that would lead us to hell. And yes, Hare Krishnas do believe in hell, even though we believe in reincarnation. Your soul can be taken to hell, and then you get this body which is just tortured for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of billions of years. There was the fear of being damned to hell. There was the fear of being led astray. So, you didn't want to hang out with karmis. You didn't want to have friends outside of your Hare Krishna community. And when I went to public school, that was a pretty difficult thing to handle. I went to a public school. There were 3,000 kids in my high school. And so I was 13 years old, and I literally just arrived in the USA for the second time in my life, and I was like, oh, okay, so now I have to assimilate myself into regular society, and I don't know how to do that, because I grew up in India in a Hare Krishna community, completely closed off from everybody else. So high school was culture shock. And there were a lot of things that, even though I had a TV growing up in India and I read books, most of the stuff that I had was pretty outdated. And so I couldn't relate to people in high school. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about most of the time. And the thing I had most difficulty with, apart from just having something in common with them, was, again, the fact that people ate meat. Or, I remember, to my utter embarrassment now, when I was my first year of high school, there was this girl during lunchtime. She was eating this fried chicken with this sauce, and I just lost it. I started screaming at her, saying that she was going to go to hell, and how could she do that? It was an animal, it was murdered, and she was eating it, and she was like my age. She was like 13 or 14 years old, and here I am, this crazy person, screaming at her for just because she's having lunch, and I don't agree with it. And yeah, I totally thought I was right to do that. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing the right thing. I'm defending poor little animals, and I'm doing God's work. But now I'm like, oh crap, can't believe I did that. It's so embarrassing. In addition to that, it was like I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend. I mean, my mom said I could have a boyfriend when I was 15, but she made it pretty clear, and it was just understood that he would have to be a Hare Krishna boy because there was no way in hell that I was gonna date a non-Hare Krishna boy. So naturally, I did not date anyone in high school. Even when I liked them, it was like, no, 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 I can't do that. I will go to hell. Ah, my mother will disown me. And there were some guys that I kind of liked, and there were some guys who I knew liked me, and I just rejected all of them. I was just like, not gonna work. Even though all this was going on, I wasn't fully aware of it because I was a kid. Like I remember being in high school thinking, why am I such a weirdo? You know I'm a bit of a weirdo, but why? And then I would justify it thinking, oh, it's because these people just don't get it. They don't understand. They're not enlightened beings like I am, so, clearly I'm better than them. Which is actually sometimes, I have to admit that was often my mentality, that I knew something that they didn't know, and therefore, that was the reason why I wasn't able to really form actual friendships in high school, whatever. But it was okay because my time in school was devoted to learning, so I learned a lot. And that was another thing that was amazing for me. I'm so grateful that I went to public high school, even though it was a bit weird and awkward for me. I learned so much. I learned about this crazy thing called human rights. I was like, what? Human beings have rights? You mean I can say things and think things and I'm protected by the law? And the other amazing thing that I learned in high school was science. It just opened up my mind. Science isn't just people pulling stuff out of their asses. This is like proof. You've got a method. Like it's not just you have to believe it. This is real. This is true. It's been proven. We have evidence. We have, peer reviewed. Lots of people have tried to refute this, and they can't because it's a fact. It's like, whoa, that's amazing. That's amazing. I never ever had that before in my life until I went to high school. But even then, I was still very religious. I was really religious until I was like 24, and that's around the time that I got away. I wasn't immersed in my religion and my community anymore. I went to Mexico and I worked there, and I was completely alone. And I had no physical contact with anybody who was a Hare Krishna. I had a lot of time to myself. I had a lot of time to think. And I still believed in God, but I started to really, really question whether my upbringing was good. It's kind of hard to deal with the reality check. I spent my whole life dancing and learning how to sing and play instruments and acting, and I thought I was the best actress, and then I realized I've never had a single day of acting class. I don't know how to act. I'm not going to go to Hollywood. Like, I'm not going to become this actress on Broadway. Do I even want that? No, I'm not really interested in being this famous celebrity who needs the lack of privacy, It's just like when you realize, holy crap, I need to be more than my talents. I need to have skills that other people want, like computer skills, or, I need to learn things like psychology or sociology or physics or chemistry or things like that. You're like, well, I never really got into science because that was not allowed. Reality check. You need science for life. If you don't, you're kind of going to remain at the bottom part of the workforce. You need to know certain things. You need to know business, And the thing is, when you're a Hare Krishna, you're not supposed to really know business because money is sinful, Money causes temptation. It leads you, it brings you Maya. Maya is going to drag you down. Even though Hare Krishnas are constantly asking for money, you're not really supposed to be attached to money. Therefore, you're not encouraged really to learn about business, especially if you're a woman. Like, I was actually told by my dad when I was 13 years old. He says, you know, why do you need an education? Wouldn't you just like to get married? I can find you a nice Indian boy. And I'm like, Dad, I'm 13. I don't want to get married. You know, and the thing is, this isn't a joke. I actually know people who were married at the ages of 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah, I didn't want that. And I'm very lucky and very grateful that my mom insisted that my sister and I have an education. I can't imagine ever being remotely happy in the life that Hare Krishnas would have ideally picked for me. But yeah, so this is my video about growing up in this weird culture that I thought was totally normal. But I mean, I guess it is normal it's normal for Hare Krishnas, but it's not really reality. Growing up in Mayapur, I thought I was growing up in India. I wasn't. I was growing up in a Hare Krishna bubble. I didn't even speak Hindi. I knew some words in Sanskrit, I knew some words in Bengali, but everyone spoke English. I'm going to be making a lot more videos concerning specific aspects of Hare Krishnas and religion and different things that I'm interested in. So this is just an introduction. And, well, it's kind of long, but I hope it's been interesting and hopefully even enjoyable. I don't know. Alright, that's it for now. Thank you for sticking around. Bye.